Hey everybody, my name is Ted Forbes and welcome back to another episode of The Art of Photography. And today in our video I have a real special treat for you guys because I want to take a look at the life and work of what I believe to be one of the more important figures in the history of photography. American photographer, this is a woman by the name of Dorothea Lange. And you're probably familiar with some of these images because some of them are very famous. And Dorothea was amazing, and I want to look at her contextually in terms of her artistic ability. I want to look at her work culturally and historically because I think it's significant on a number of levels, and I think that is what, well, some of the things that make her one of the more important figures in the history of photography. And this is very timely as well because actually in 2 weeks PBS has a special, a documentary coming out on the life and work of Dorothea Lange, and it's called Dorothea Lange, Grab a Hunk of Lightning. And I got an email last week from somebody at PBS, and they were offering some press clips and trying to get the word out and promote this. And guys, this is an exceptional documentary. It is incredibly well done. There's a lot of really cool footage that I didn't know existed in it. I'm actually going to show you a clip in our video today. But before we get to that, I do want to talk about Dorothea. I want to talk about her work and kind of set it up. And if you're interested in seeing more, I definitely recommend this documentary that's coming out on PBS. It looks fantastic. But to give you a little background on Dorothea Lange, she was born in 1895 and lived until 1965. And her first big gig when she decided to become a photographer, and I think this represents and shows what a go-getter this woman was at the age of 24. In 1919, she opened up her first photography studio. She actually went out and found financial backing to do this and was quite an entrepreneur, worked long hours, and she did portrait sessions. And these were mostly family pictures for the wealthy in the neighborhood, business people, etc. And if you look at some of these portraits, and this isn't what the body of work I want to focus on today, her earlier stuff, but it definitely is worth looking up, so go do some research on that. But very indicative of the early 20th century. There's a large influence of pictorialism that comes in these, and there were some really beautiful portraits that exist in this early body of work. She soon became tired of doing portraits and had moved on to doing studio still lifes, some plant work, and this wasn't really working out for her either. And in 1929, with the crash of the US stock market, she became interested in starting to capture lifestyle photography in the sense of social documentary. So starting to look at what America was going through her lens. And this led to two major bodies of work that we're going to look at today when we look at some images. And the first was work that she did for the Resettlement Administration, which was part of FDR's New Deal. And basically she was in the Southwest and was doing documentation of people who had literally lost everything in their lives and were trying to move to California for a better life. You had the Dust Bowl. You had a large set of climate-related and also financial-related devastation to this country and what it did to people. And so there was this real human side to that. The second body of work, this was after the bombing of Pearl Harbor at our entry into World War II for the U.S. She went to go work actually for the Resettlement Authority and did a huge body of work of what was going on in the Japanese internment camps in the United States. And so these are two very dramatic, historically significant, and huge events that turned and changed the course of America. And you have a woman here, and this is, I think, what I want to get across is the important part of Dorothea Lange. If you look at historically throughout the media, before photography and before printing techniques had become on the level of the professionalism that they later became, and if even gone on further now, but from a technology standpoint, before photographs were used, I don't think people had an accurate picture and description and were able to put a face on what was going on with certain events. And Dorothea Lange was one of those photographers who was able to change a lot of that, and people really saw what poverty looked like, and they saw what desperation looked like, they saw what an internment camp looked like, and they saw what the human condition looked like. And I think that is one of the things that makes Dorothea's work so important. Anyway, I think the best thing we can do now is go look at some images, so come on over with me and let's look at the work of Dorothea Lange. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the work of Dorothea Lange today, and I'm going to focus on the major two periods of her career, which were the Great Depression era photos that she did for the U.S. government, as well as the Japanese internment photos from World War II. And those are the two big periods of work that she is most known for. I am using Pinterest for all of this, as I do on all of our photo lit episodes, and if you want to check out my Pinterest account, the link will be in the show notes, but it's pinterest.com/Ted Forbes. Pinterest is a wonderful way of bookmarking images, so you can actually go see the sources to which I pulled these images if you are interested in seeing more. And I recommend that you do so because Dorothea Lange is a wonderful, wonderful photographer and very important, one of the finest photographers from the United States, particularly of her era. And go check out more if you like what you see and you're interested. Anyway, we'll go to the bottom. I'm going to start here with an image that is fairly unconventional when you think of Dorothea Lange. And Dorothea Lange started her career as a portrait artist, had a portrait studio and shot formal portraits. And this type of work influenced and permeated her work her entire career. And I think this image really personifies and captures a lot of that, while taking it a little bit outside of context, because usually you do have context in her images, which speaks, and we'll look at those in a minute. But this image is a little bit unconventional for Dorothea Lange. There's a swirling focus to this, probably shot in very low light with a very shallow depth of field. There may have been even a little bit of motion blur. But I love the way that the eyes just pierce this photograph, and that's where your attention is drawn, is to this woman's eyes. There's just something so beautiful about this, the way that she's basically wrapped in a blanket, and so you really the distractions are down to a bare minimum here, and you're really drawn into the face and the expression, and really this, the windows to the soul, if you will, of being able to look through somebody's eyes. And I think that it's amazing. If we look at some of the more popular photos that she's known for, this is probably her most famous. This is the migrant mother photo. And this is in every photo history book that you'll ever find, and it is a wonderful photograph. I believe this is posed. And again, you see that influence of being a portrait artist coming out in her work, but the way the mother's hand is up against her chin, the way the two kids are looking behind her back, and there's a baby in her arms that you don't really pick up on right away. And to me, there's always been this kind of surrealism to the baby. Maybe it's a doll, maybe it's not. It is an actual baby. But a wonderful photograph. There are some outtakes to this as well that exist that you can see that she did. They're not as strong, but what she was obviously trying to capture here was a little bit more context. And so what you have here is, the plate in the foreground. You can tell that they're living in a makeshift camp of some kind. But no matter how you look at this, the one of the mother nursing, is that, these all capture this kind of human condition. They capture the soul. And what's really interesting to me, that even in these extreme conditions of people with literally nothing but the clothes on their back, living in an awful environment, trying to move somewhere where they can get their lives back together, you do see that human soul come through. This wonderful shot of this woman who's absolutely filthy. Her hair's a mess, but there's this wonderful smile on her face. And I think that is one of the reasons that photographers like Dorothea Lange stick out in the history of, where they work contextually, is because you do have that human condition that comes through, and it's a contrast to the conditions they're in. But there's a way that, because you see some of this light shining through, that we're able to relate a little bit and associate it without, it gives it a sense of timelessness. Even this little girl sitting on the ground, and she's got a little tin cup, and she's in this makeshift pallet that she's sleeping on, and she's not even smiling, but there's something about her, the look in her eyes, and you long to see a sense of hope in some of these. It's more obvious in some others. Another great one is this image of the kid with the torn shirt. And I don't think this one was posed necessarily. This was probably more of an improvised off-the-cuff image, but it does have some of those classical elements of what you see, the way she will pose elements with people in the image. Another great one, this woman and the kid here. And if you look at the makeshift baby bottle, it's a Coke bottle with, the rubber thing on the top there. And, people making the best out of a situation. Another one of her classic portraits, and I love this one too, is this woman. And you do see this sense of despair. We are in the Great Depression here. The way that she's on this landscape, which maybe, indicates some of that positivity too, but the way she's posed. And a lot of Dorothea Lange's poses you're going to see are very classically influenced, very classical composition in that sense. I'll give you another example, which is these two kids. With their heads in their hands. And this is a very popular thing that a lot of photographers have done. We talked about this when we talked about Julia Margaret Cameron, who's a completely different photographer from a different era in a different country, and how these all echo back to the Raphael Sistine Madonna excerpt. This is a little piece of these two cherubs it's at the base of this large painting, the Sistine Madonna. And, you do see this echoed in photography quite a bit. And so you do see that influence projected into the work that she was doing. Another another great shot that really kind of brings to mind some of the work of somebody like Paul Strand, is this high contrast photo of these people in line. The way the dress of the day and the gentlemen wearing suits and hats trying to get employment. It's just absolutely beautiful. Kind of an off-ball shot that I found here was this high contrast photo, not in terms of composition or lighting, but what we're seeing here is not poverty. This is the other end of the spectrum, with this woman walking down the street with these big shopping centers in the back and the little boy with the coat, and we're seeing the absolute opposite condition of what we're seeing with the other people. What's interesting to me, though, is you look at the look on this woman's face and probably just surprised, glanced over, saw this woman taking the photo, but it does not echo so much that positivity or that longing or that hope that the depression stuff has. And anyway, it's very interesting. On the other end of the spectrum, we do have the Japanese internment photos. And without going too much into the history of everything here, during World War II, not one of the finer moments of the United States, but being obviously at war with the Japanese during this time, were the internment camps and basically prison camps that Japanese citizens were corralled into. Again, you see these Japanese children here holding up an American flag. And so what's interesting is this sense of patriotism to the very country that, that basically has rounded them up. Another one of these kids doing the Pledge of Allegiance, these Japanese kids. And with beautiful pictures. I love the way she captured children. Another very famous photo, too, is this one of this presumably gentleman and his child here. And what's interesting to me is there is a completely different style, a different look, and a different aesthetic. And an obviously different nationality to the subjects that she's photographing, but this has such a dynamic relationship to something like the migrant mother, for instance. Not nearly as posed, different composition, but what you're seeing is speaking to that sense that through whatever the condition is that is oppressing, the sense of family, the sense of parenthood, and the sense of children, and the sense of love that comes between those. And I know that these may seem a little frilly for talking about photography, but you do see that come through with a lot of these. This wonderful sense of family. I believe the Japanese prisoners were not split up in terms of family. They were allowed to be together, and she captured a lot of that. Another strikingly dramatic image of these prisoners of war lined up. What was a former racetrack has now become an internment camp. And some of this more grotesque side of this, the backstory on this image is there was a Japanese store owner who was forced to give up his store. And so you have a grocery store that's with the sold sign on the front and "I am an American" stamped onto the front. And it's just interesting that the very country that was suffering during the Great Depression, we see a different side of it here. And, it's unfortunate in some cases, but that's why work like this makes the work is so important in the context and the history of photography, because it's documenting what was going on. It documents an era. It documents the human condition during these times. Another great image of this Japanese child with this wonderful smile on his face, with the box on the ground, with the expression with the hands, and again you see this a lot in Miss Lange's work, and it's absolutely wonderful. We're going to move on, and I want to talk about the PBS special that's coming up, and so let's switch off the computer, and I want to talk about that a little bit. So that is the work of Miss Dorothea Lange, and I hope that this video has helped you guys probably contextualize some of these images. A lot of these, particularly the migrant mother, are extremely famous, and we see them everywhere. And one thing that kind of pop culture and history tends to do just by the passing of time is we tend to take things out of context, particularly in today's age with social media and stuff. Not that that's a bad thing, but that has been a change, and I hope that this has helped contextualize some of that. As promised, I do want to show a clip from this documentary that's coming out. Now, this is called Dorothea Lange, Grab a Hunk of Lightning, and it's part of the American Masters series that PBS is doing. This is an amazingly cool looking documentary, and I'm really excited about watching this. It's going to air on August 29th, 2014, and that's at 9:00 p.m. And what you want to do is check your local PBS affiliate if you're in the US, and check your local listings. And I would highly recommend you watch this. If you are not in the United States, or you are watching this video in the future, you can also find this on DVD, which will be released in October of 2014. And so this really looks fantastic. Now, what you're going to see in this clip is some interview behind the scenes footage that I thought was particularly fascinating. And you're going to see Dorothea Lange talking about some of her images. And the gentleman she's talking to is John Sarkowski. John Sarkowski, I've mentioned before. He is very well known. He was one of the famous curators at MoMA in New York. He was the curator of photography there, who brought to light some amazing famous photographers. Most notably, he went out on a limb, and when we talked about William Eggleston and some of those color photos that were kind of shocking and weird and out of place, he backed a lot of that stuff. And John Sarkowski is amazing in and of himself. There's several books that he's written, and I have never actually seen video footage of him, and he's kind of a trippy guy, smoking a pipe throughout the whole thing and making weird gestures, and it's very entertaining and really cool to kind of contextualize some of that. If you're into Mad Men and that kind of thing, he looks like he fell right out of the TV show. Anyway, so this is John Sarkowski talking to Dorothea Lange, and I'm going to end the show with this, and they are discussing some of her work of the original American migrants.
The migration tended to go to the west. They came from Nebraska, they came from South and North Dakota, they came from New Mexico, they came from Texas. The migration was composed of people who became called Okies, but actually only a small minority of them came from Oklahoma.
In this case, instead of the covered wagon, it was the covered jalopy. As a result of the creation of the highway system, they were able to pack up and move to a place that seemed to be a better land where opportunities awaited in California.
You could use the covered wagon, and then either those cars bogged down in the mud or that group of cars which represents more people.
So when
Well,
people really began arriving.
That car that we see the back of, that was the first car I saw that came out of the Dust Bowl. And that was the day the darn thing was discovered, what was happening. Nobody knew it. And then it was a rush. Never has stopped, that influx.
Paul and Dorothea were the first to witness and to understand the causes of this huge migration. And Paul was unusually creative in trying to understand it. At the Yuma, Arizona crossing into California, he hired a gas station attendant. He said, I'll pay you a certain amount of money if you will simply keep a tally of how many cars filled with these people are coming into California. And we are talking about several 100,000 people entering California hoping to stay there. This was a major problem for California to absorb.
Lange and Taylor were in the middle of this influx, putting a face on westward migration. Who were these folks and where did they come from? Well, they were basically white Americans, hardworking, family folks. They weren't coming to feed off the state. They were coming to work and find a home. They hoped to reestablish themselves as family farmers.
So once again, that is Dorothea Lange, Grab a Hunk of Lightning, which airs on August 29th, 2014 on PBS. Check your local times, your local affiliates for time listings. 9 o'clock is what it says in here, but there are 4 time zones in the U.S., so I don't know what 9 o'clock means. So check your local listings. It may mean 9 o'clock. Anyway, check that out. And once again, guys, this has been another episode of The Art of Photography. I'll see you guys next time. Later.